welcome all the participants now to this session on constructing arguments. This is going to be quite a curious session because we all are involved in one or the other argument in our lifetime. But still we need a certain kind of orientation towards a construction of arguments quite systematically, because making an argumentative statement has never been part of our life for centuries. If you do some kind of a survey of humanity, we've only been told to keep quiet. We've only been told to listen to others. And in case you raise any question, normally people will tell you like you are quite disobedient and you got to keep quiet. And don't argue with me is what most of the people would tell us. Because of which there's only a kind of a habit in all of us to just listen to people. Because of which, unfortunately, we don't really have this habit of systematically putting forward before people our arguments about anything. Instead, we have understood arguments to be some squabbles or fights. And whenever we involve ourselves in any arguments, we end up being aggressive, and the relationships will definitely become bitter, and whatever we wanted to put forward before people will ultimately become quite contaminated, because the thought that you had on your mind in fact is coupled with a lot of aggression, because of which your thought will become ununderstandable or hateful. So in this particular session, I want to talk about argumentation, because we need to unlearn a few things and learn, of course, some new things. What do we mean by argument? And what is it that a person does, especially in research, when he does a bit of argumentation? And how healthy is argumentation in our daily life? For centuries, we had this habit of listening to our seniors, our parents, our teachers, and we always had immense faith in what people told us. And we did not really think about the possibilities of interpretations. And nobody had told us that we had some access, of course, to questions about what we were being told. Instead, we always thought that we had to have faith in what we were told. And it was only in the recent past that there was certain revolution in Europe, wherein people like Immanuel Kant or Locke or Plato, who started to come up with certain observation about what was happening around Europe. And we also have to refer to a particular era in the history of Europe called the era of enlightenment. Like how the word means, it was a period of era of enlightenment. And what do you think is enlightenment? You come out of certain kind of darkness. You come out of certain kind of superstitions, or you at least arrive at a stage where you start understanding certain things. So argumentation is very required for all of us to arrive at an understanding of certain things. And what is understanding here? Understanding through debates. It should not be one person's opinion. It should not be one person's order that we are supposed to have in our understanding. Instead, this understanding, in fact, has to involve a lot of exchange of ideas, exchange of information, exchange of opinions, and ultimately it has to become a consensus that you all arrive at in a group, in a mass. It is this kind of understanding that we are talking about. And it's all about democratic dissemination of knowledge. It's all about democratic dissemination of information. And how does knowledge actually form here? Because I use the word knowledge here. There are many words that we come across in the area of research: fact, information, knowledge, myth. So there are many things that form the crux of our research, and a researcher when he is still a beginner, has got to be quite aware to make this distinction between what exactly is a fact that he can incorporate inside his research and what he has got to sort out because he finds that to be quite fictitious. And he also has to have certain discrete ability to find out what is actually a myth. And for all this, of course, like I mentioned in the last class, there is supposed to be a lot of pre-reading that is to be done. And in case you have done that pre-reading, you can definitely arrive at this level of argumentation wherein you can distinguish between what is a fact and what is not a fact. And here, knowledge is not something which is borrowed. Knowledge is not something which you can simply take from others. Knowledge can be arrived at only when you have access to information, and that information has got to be interpreted. I repeat, you get some information basically, and all this while we used to find the information to be knowledge by itself, and we had thought that information was an end by itself. And that is how the priests actually had got upper hand over us. And that is how religion had got upper hand over us. And that is exactly why patriarchy had got upper hand over the women. And that is how even the politicians managed to gain upper hand over us, because we always think information is the end by itself. But now onwards, we have to understand that information can become knowledge only when we start interpreting it. So here you have news channels which keep bombarding us with a lot of information about COVID-19 crisis today. And if we settle for an agreement that what the news channels are giving us is 100% authentic, then that becomes knowledge, which is of course false knowledge. We need to verify. We need to verify. So we are now at a stage where information, when it is gathered by us or given to us by anybody, it is always supposed to be subjected to a lot of interpretation through criticism. What is critical thinking? We kind of touched upon this as well in the last class, but we'll just do a little bit of revision of what is critical thinking very shortly. Critical interpreting information, that's it. When some information is gathered, you have to interpret it. And what is interpretation? Interpretation is nothing but trying to understand something with questions. Put questions. For example, somebody asks you not to enter a particular area because they saw a snake. You cannot simply arrive at some kind of an agreement that, of course, I should not enter that area because there is a snake, because somebody saw a snake there. There should be some amount of skepticism in us that the person who is now restraining us from entering a particular area may have seen a rope, or he may have assumed that there is a snake. So there are various possibilities where we can definitely interpret the given information so that we can arrive at proper knowledge. So knowledge is something which we can arrive at only by interpreting information, because of which we have knowledge systems, because of which we understand knowledge in plurality. We cannot say that there is only one kind of knowledge in this world, because we are living in such a democratic world where we have 100 forms of knowledges about the same thing. It could be religion, it could be literature, it could be science, no science. It could be anything else other than science. You have plurality coming into operation, because we deal with ideologies, we deal with ideas, we deal with exchange of ideas. And here, when we try to arrive at some knowledge, I repeat that we have to arrive at any kind of knowledge with a lot of argumentation, and in healthy terms, it is called debating. And how do we debate? How do we debate? Debating is a very important art that most students actually get involved in their school life. And in case they don't carry on with that particular habit when they come to college, they'll lose out on that wonderful habit of debating, because debate is something which we all need to have within our daily life. and the realm of our daily life. Because unless we have this habit of debating, we cannot arrive at any knowledge at all. And this kind of knowledge which we arrive at with a lot of interpretations is called epistemology. Epistemology meaning, it's another jargon that I'm introducing you to in case you are students there. Epistemology is nothing but arriving at some kind of an understanding about anything that we come across through certain debates. We ask questions, we arrive at answers, and then we understand certain things. So it's a process of understanding. Epistemology is nothing but a process of understanding a phenomenon. And here, when we do research, we try to understand things. And what our understanding has got to be now communicated to the reader. So in case we have understood something to be a phenomenon that repeatedly occurs, which has to be investigated into quite seriously through your research, then it has to be communicated to people. And that is where your language matters. And that is exactly where your construction of the argument matters in a very systematic manner, because research is not something that can happen simply randomly. It has to happen very systematically with the use of your language, very, very consciously, because you have a lot of responsibility. Research is a responsible job, research is a serious job, and research, of course, takes a lot of conscientiousness, because you have to own the responsibility of what you are saying, because you are trying to communicate to the outside world about something which you thought to be researchable, because there were questions that you had put to that particular phenomenon or about that particular phenomenon, and you are trying to communicate to the world that this is something which is worth knowing about. This is something which is worth reading, because this phenomenon, in fact, was highly researchable for me, because you understood what epistemology is and you are trying to create another episteme for the world. Right? You're trying to create one episteme for the world. You're trying to create some kind of a knowledge form for the world. And knowledge, like I mentioned, is not a loose word here, and you should not use it loosely. Nobody can use the word knowledge loosely unless one knows what knowledge is. Next is, in this theory of augmentation, you have to be aware of a new term called empiricism. Empiricism or empirical study involves studying anything with evidences, as simple as that. We never had this habit of asking for evidences in the past, right? We had only one mode of life, and that mode of life was called mode of faith. We never questioned anybody, and we never asked anybody for proof. Supposing somebody told us not to wear slippers when we entered the temples, we never asked why. And in case somebody tells us to wash our feet when we come back home after wandering around outside, we don't ask why. We never care for reasons, because we always thought that the elders were always right, and all of us had been given one attitude called filial attitude, that is, be obedient to your seniors. But here we are now entering a new era where all people have become highly inquisitive and they have a lot of questions. And here, when you say anything to anybody, immediately there will be a rebuttal from the opponent who asks you for evidence. If you say it's going to be Trump's time next term as well, oh, is that so? Is that so? How can you say that? You might be quite confident, and you may have done some kind of a research and survey about how Trump can definitely come back to power in the next term as well. And here, the questioner has already asked you for some evidence. You can't simply get away with your statement, because you made that statement in public that there will be Trump again in the next term as well in America. You have to give reason for it. Here, you explain your statement. You justify your statement. Argumentation is all about explanation and justification. Explanation. Why did you say that? Why do you think Trump will come back to power? So you should have reasons. Argumentation is nothing but trying to persuade and convince somebody as to why you think what you said is correct. It's almost like a lawyer's argument inside the court of law. He says this guy is innocent, and the judge will not immediately grant pardon for the accused. The judge would definitely ask the lawyer to produce some evidences, and then starts the argument from the side of the lawyer, who will definitely present hundreds of evidences to prove the innocence of the accused. Same way, even in academic investigation, you have to produce a lot of evidence for claiming what you said is correct, and that is called empirical study. And our research, in fact, demands such empirical study because we are doing investigation, tanike. Investigation involves not just one person's opinion here. Investigation involves democratic understanding of a phenomenon. In case it's just one person's opinion, I introduce you to another jargon. It's called polemics. Polemics. What is a polemic? It's simply your opinion. It's simply your opinion, meaning you don't simply care about what the other person would think. You want to express your opinion and you would just say that vociferously, like how there's a person called Chakravarti Sulibale who has said so much about Jawaharlal Nehru, and I introduce you to a book called Nehru Parade Saritu. It's a book in Kannada, and in case there are people who know Kannada, can definitely access that book. And I can simply say that it is polemics because he doesn't produce evidences for what he says, except for just mentioning one or two dates here and there. It is just a kind of a vociferous argument about Nehru, which ultimately reads like hate speech. So if I want to do some research on Jawaharlal Nehru in my English studies, I have to do a lot of thinking whether or not I can include Sulibale's statement about Nehru, because I don't know if Sulibale is a historian or not. All that I know about him is he is, of course, a journalist who has done some kind of research, but that research, is it sufficient for me to include him in my thesis? Because I am trying to produce an argument. Understand this, research is all about constructing an argument of about 200 pages. You simply argue and argue, explain and explain, and justify and justify. And to do this, you need to have only the authentic reference materials. And I need to think twice whether or not I can include Sulibale here, because he's not a historian. And if I'm doing some kind of a work that borders on history, and if I bring in one name which appears to be inauthentic, then my research would definitely be struck down as faulty research, because I have included in my bibliography some name which appears to be slightly shaky. So when you are doing some research, be careful with what kind of people you are quoting and how you are trying to produce evidences. You cannot even produce evidences of somebody's oral statement. If you want to claim that Trump will come back to power, you cannot say, my neighbor said so, or my teacher said so, or some politician said so. This is loose argument, and this is not argument at all. And people will not take you seriously. And we are talking about serious argument here, which actually needs a lot of investigation. And if you make a statement, you can definitely have the right to make that statement. You can say anything. I repeat what I said in my last class. You can definitely say anything in research, but if you have enough material to defend it, say it. Otherwise, keep your opinion to yourselves, because if you simply express your opinion in research, people will not call it research. Instead, it will be only struck down as polemic writing. So we have two kinds of writings. One is polemic writing, the other one is research writing, which of course is called academic investigation. And in polemics, normally people will not do any investigation. They will stick to their personal opinions. So researchers don't really have the liberty to mention their personal opinions about anything. If you say God exists, people will ask you questions. How? Where? Like if you have watched that movie Bhakta Prahlada, Dr. Rajkumar asks his son about the presence of God in all parts of his palace, because the son says God exists everywhere. And Hiranyakashipu, his father, asks for the evidence about the presence of God even in the pillars. Because you made a statement which is quite shocking. You say like God exists everywhere and I need to verify that. So research is all about not just making statements, it's all about trying to construct a proper verifiable argument. When you say something, I should be able to get back to what you said and try to check out for the authenticity of what you have said, and I should come up with the same opinion as yours. Only then your opinion inside your thesis will be validated as correct research and correct argument. So avoid polemics, avoid loose references, because your bibliography matters a lot. The moment your evaluator takes up the thesis for evaluation, he might definitely want to look for the bibliography. And he would want to check for bibliography because your bibliography is what will testify to the kind of argument that you have presented inside your thesis. If your bibliography is pretty short or highly outdated or disconnected, then your thesis is not a thesis. Don't you ever get carried away by people who say like thesis has got to be bound and it has to be colorful, it has to be beautiful. Such things in fact don't matter at all, because it is only an opinion regarding the exterior of your thesis, but I'm talking about the thesis in academic sense. Thesis has to be understood properly here. What is a thesis? What is a dissertation?
Swami sir, we are not able to hear you. Check your mic, please.
Yeah. Now? Hello?
No.
Now I can hear you, sir.
Now we can hear you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So thesis, the word has to be understood clearly here is what I'm trying to say, because thesis is quite different from homeworks that you normally do in your colleges. Because when a homework is given to you by any lecturer, there is a precise destination for it. And you know what you're going to write. And the expectation is already set there. But thesis, in fact, is quite different from such homework, because thesis is a process where you construct argument to prove what you have said. So try to understand that the thesis in fact depends upon proper argument, and your proper argument can be testified to only by proper bibliography. So when you do your work, when you start your research, make sure that you do two things very seriously. One is, like Professor Yoganand mentioned yesterday, huge amount of survey of literature and a lot of review of literature. And if those things go inside your thesis in the bibliography part, your thesis will definitely become a wonderful thesis. Because you cannot in any way falter in your argument if your bibliography is correct. And you need to first understand what you're going to argue about. You cannot have multiple arguments inside your thesis. Try to stick to one argument which has to be arrived at. Your thesis cannot have multiple arguments, and if you have multiple arguments, then it will definitely lead to fallacies. If you want to avoid fallacies inside your thesis, make sure that your thesis will not lead to confusing, contradictory, multifaceted arguments, because there is no question of having a multitude of arguments inside your thesis, because you are not allowed to do that. Once you have expressed the scope of your research and also the methodology that you're going to adopt, you cannot go away from it, you cannot stray away from it. You have to stick to your methodology, and then you can definitely think about what kind of references you can bring in. So research is all about serious thinking about how to bring in the reference materials. And you can bring in the reference materials only when you know what kind of methodology you're going to follow and what methods you're going to adopt. So once this is clear, then your argument cannot falter. Yeah. Some new, some important words now. The first word here is explanation. Explanation. What do we do when we explain things? What do we do when we do this explanation? What kind of a language should I adopt? You make some statement about some author. You consider the author to be a feminist author. How do I bring about my explanation here? You don't have to include too many biographical details here because that's not argument. It's not your research. And you don't have to say general things about feminism because it's not your research. Instead, it has to be assumed that feminism is known to the reader and also to you as well. And instead, you have to straight come to the point to prove that the author you are considering for your research is a feminist. So how do I do this? There's already this presupposition that everybody knows about feminism. You straight away consider the author's orientation towards the characterization inside his or her novels or plays. I repeat, the moment you know what is feminism, you can simply start thinking and writing about the way the characters are built and constructed by the author, because the characterization borders upon the theory of feminism. And in order to prove that, how do I now bring about the reference materials? There are different kinds of works that you have to read. Seminal texts and secondary sources. I repeat, seminal texts and secondary sources. And the researchers of today, in fact, have got to understand that seminal texts are very important. And you need to have a proper understanding of what can be a seminal text and what is a secondary resource material. A seminal text is going to give you a lot of orientation towards the theory that you're adopting. If you are working on feminism, then you need to know who are the writers who have written quite broadly about feminism. And what are the works that are actually the Bibles in the area of feminism that have to compulsorily go inside my bibliography. You cannot leave out people who count in the area of feminism if you are working on feminism, even with reference to Indian writers, because feminism as an academic discipline basically began in Europe. So you need to have a list of the people who have to go inside your bibliography. So I have done some reading of the seminal texts. How did I do that? I managed to make a list of all these seminal texts, and I went about those books quite deeply, and now I know what this feminist theory is all about. So I need to only do this investigation of the concerned author, trying to locate his characters within the realm of the theories that are propagated by the European authors. If characterization by this particular author borders on how the feminist theories I have mentioned about patriarchy or gender disparities, then my argument will hold good. So seminal texts. And next is secondary sources. What are these secondary sources? The secondary sources actually are directly linked with the author that you are working on. So you're going to quote two different kinds of reference materials: seminal texts, who in fact are which are connected to the area of your research, but secondary materials are connected directly with the author that you are concerned about. Hope I am clear here, right? So when we do this investigation, how many seminal texts do I need to work on for my research? in case you're working on music. What kind of texts do matter as part of my bibliography? If I'm working on cultural studies, in cultural studies, what exactly am I working on? Am I talking about power? Am I talking about consumerism? What am I talking about? And how am I going to locate cultural studies within the realm of English studies? And am I going to work on some primary texts? What kind of research will I look for? So people normally ask you to do a lot of background reading precisely for this, so that when you talk, you can talk with a lot of sense. When somebody asks you like what you want to work on, you can simply talk without any kind of obstructions because you've done your reading. Likewise, when you start your writing, there won't be the question of writer's block. Why do the researchers actually waste a lot of time? They might definitely give hundreds of excuses, but those excuses are 100% lame excuses. The researchers actually lag behind only because they have not done their homework. There could be some genuine cases here and there, but unfortunately, the case with most researchers is there could be the possibility of lacking in their reading, some kind of a lacking in their reading. If you have done your reading, writing is not a problem, because argumentation, like I mentioned, is very much connected with the reference items that you have collected. Another problem that we will all face is, if I have gathered so much material, how do I organize this? Because when we were in MA, we were not exposed to the luxury of internet then. We had to either depend on our seniors for materials or some teachers for reference materials. Otherwise, we had to depend only on what was being taught inside the classrooms, and we had to make our own running notes. And we had one classmate who had this obsession for materials, because he had thought that if he collected a lot of materials, that would definitely lead to good marks. And he was living in the hostel in our campus. It so happened when we were close to the examinations, I had to have lunch with him in his hostel, and I had paid a visit to his room just to give him some tips about how to make preparations. And I was curious to know if he had collected some materials. You don't believe me, he had collected closely a lorry full of materials. And now, what do you do with so much material if you don't know what you have with you? It's another very interesting and a very important fallacy that a researcher would encounter, because when I say you have to have reference materials, you cannot just go crazily hunt for materials. You hunt your materials very conscientiously, and you should know what you're looking for. And every time you collect a material, make sure that it goes down on a piece of paper as part of your bibliography, and that is what is called systematic study. Once you come across some book, know what has to go down on that piece of paper. In case that book is related to your work, it has to go to your bibliography. And how do I manage to get that inside my bibliography? Publication details. Publication details. So in the publication details, what are the things that become important for me? Name of the author, fine. Name of the book, fine. Besides that, you should include year of publication, publisher's name, and also the page number from which you took the material that you're quoting inside your text. Because we are dealing with empirical study, and every damn thing will be called an evidence, and you cannot get away saying something without providing evidence, because that will later be accounted as plagiarism if you don't properly quote. Because argumentation in fact is a serious business here, and when you write something inside your thesis by taking certain material verbatim from some particular book, and if you don't acknowledge the source, that will be called plagiarism. So there is so much that matters in this research. So be very careful about the reference materials. Organization, like I mentioned, note making is a very important skill that you should develop. Note making. All of us have made notes, right? Even now, when we are teachers, we give notes to our students. But I'm not sure how good we are at making notes. It's a very elementary activity that I am recommending here, but a very important one at that. Note making activity cannot be in any way taken lightly. How do I make notes? How do I make notes? All your notes, in fact, have to be made only in correspondence to the thesis that you're writing. Wherever you come across anything that is interesting, that has to be simply simplified in a lucid language, and that has to be written down in a notebook meant for your thesis. So a systematic researcher will carry with him a notebook meant only for notes, and he has to jot down anything that he comes across, even inside a library or when he is browsing some internet. The moment he comes across anything that is interesting, that has to be simplified and it has to go inside his notebook, and he should know when he has to use it. And he should know where he has to use it, because he's constructing arguments. He's constructing serious arguments. So in order to construct the serious arguments, I need to have as many evidences as possible to be it's not very compulsory to have those many quotes in your thesis, but people say a quality thesis will have at least 3 quotes per page, at least. So if it is a 200-page thesis, your thesis has got to contain close to 600 quotes. Citations, they are called. Only then your thesis can be called evidence-based thesis. 600 minimum. So in order to come up with 600 quotes inside my thesis, just think how many books have to go inside your bibliography. A minimum of 100 books, a minimum. So you cannot read through all the books, of course, but what is needed here is referencing the books. Nobody can read 100 books to construct a thesis of about 200 pages. But when it comes to referencing them, there is no discount from it. Anybody for that matter has got to have references, and the quality of your research, like I mentioned, depends on the quality of your references. Because when I had gone for an MPhil Viva in some private university in Bangalore, it was on some critical theories, and the person, whoever had done that work, had somehow forgotten to include Bakhtin, both in the text and in the bibliography part. And Bakhtin was directly connected to the work that she had done, and it was a surprise that she had sprung upon me by not including Bakhtin. I did not consider that to be a serious error, but if you really want to give PhD to that thesis, then it is objectionable. But for MPhil, I found that to be okay. So a researcher has got to know which book and which author works like Bible inside the thesis. So such books have got to be there inside your bibliography and the thesis. And make sure that you have close to more than 100 books as part of your bibliography. Not necessarily books. You can also have research articles. You can have even newspaper clippings in case you want to mention them as part of your bibliography. Anything that you happen to come across as a radio clip or an audio clip, you can even mention movies. So you all have to know how to quote them and how to mention them inside your bibliography, because if you are doing your thesis in English studies, we depend on something called MLA format. And MLA format has got certain recommendations for writing the bibliography in a systematic manner and also constructing the citations in a systematic manner. So you have to do a little bit of extra study of this book called MLA style sheet, which is available even on net. The soft copy is available. Just get to know how to do this citation work. And thesis construction demands your computer knowledge and language skills, because there's no discount there as well. You need to be slightly computer savvy, and you need to know how to quote. You need to know how to format, because try not to depend on others. You do your own proofreading and you do your own typing properly. Because if you depend on others, the errors will definitely be more. And if you do your work yourself, the number of errors that are going to be committed will be very less. So this is where I wanted to stop about argumentation. Now I'll talk about the fallacies in argumentation. Fallacies. The first one is a very interesting one. It's called shifting the burden of proof. It's a very interesting fallacy. Okay. What is this? What is this? Assume that you're working on some philosophical aspect. You have this luxury that the people around have no knowledge about what you're working on. For example, you want to work on maybe Advaita, and in case you are doing this particular work in a place where people don't really know what Advaita is all about, and nobody knows anything about Shankara, and here you think that you have a lot of luxury because you're working on the reader's ignorance. And this is a fallacy because you are banking on somebody's ignorance. And you say like Advaita is the most authentic theory ever produced in India. And you get away saying that because nobody asked you any questions. It's almost like many books that were written and many theories that were created in the past, which actually were dogmatic. And they were dogmatic and they were unquestionable because people did not have the habit of questioning. And the same luxury cannot be capitalized on by you now because there is some ignorance around about the field that you are working on. And nobody can assume that to be true. And you cannot assume that the people around will simply think that it is correct and true, because you are working on constructing an argument on the grounds of somebody's ignorance. So that's a very dangerous fallacy, and that would definitely keep you in a state of embarrassment, because ultimately, if you have already completed your work and in case somebody happens to locate certain flaws inside your thesis, which had appeared to be completely authentic only to you, then you are in for a surprise, because people will consider your thesis to be faulty because you worked on people's ignorance. It's called shifting the burden of proof, meaning you don't want to provide the people any proof because people are not asking me for proof, and people are not likely to ask me for any proof. Another interesting fallacy is false dilemma. These things are available very extensively even on internet, and in case you want to gather more information about all these things, you can simply browse through all this and just make a note of these fallacies. Okay, shifting the burden of proof, false dilemma, all these things can definitely be understood largely better if you do the work yourself, because now when I am giving you certain hints about the fallacies, I can only be quite brief because it's within a limited time span that we work on certain things, and this is only an orientation, right? So try to gather information on net. Now, false dilemma. So what is this false dilemma? You are not sure about what you're saying. You are only trying to say something and you say it in a very vague manner. It could be this or it could be that. Meaning, does God exist? At times, it seemed to me that God exists, but whenever I had problems in life, I thought God does not exist. So when I get some increment, God exists. When there is too much expenditure, which is quite unexpected, God doesn't exist. This is not going to be a thesis. You're giving me two extremes and you are asking me to choose from them. And this is called false dilemma, and this is faulty. This is seriously faulty. And you cannot ask people to buy what you are saying. And people question, Next is the fallacy of a single cause. The fallacy of a single cause. I mentioned this to Dr. Raghu yesterday when there was this discussion regarding suicides. If you want to work on some particular concept, make sure that you're not working on a limited phenomenon. Meaning, if there is some accident on a particular road, you cannot consider that road to be an accident zone just because you witnessed a bloodied accident. You need to provide proof to consider that to be an accident zone so that your corporation can work on giving you some humps there or speed breakers there. And your argument will falter because you don't have the premise which is strong, right? Your thesis has got to have a proper premise, foundation. If your foundation is slightly shaky or largely shaky, your argumentation will of course be shaky, because what you are trying to claim before people itself is faulty. So how can you construct an authentic argument? You can construct argument only when you have a proper premise. So we can think about an argument only when we have a proper premise. That's why lawyers ask you not to lie to them. Normally people say you should not lie to doctors and lawyers only because of this. If you lie to them, they cannot work on your case. Same way, when you have constructed your premise quite loosely, how can you construct your argument? So yesterday, Yoganand gave one beautiful example of a title, Journey as a Metaphor. So you need to have a very clear understanding of what a metaphor means and what journey means, especially in literatures, and how you have to understand the theory of travelogues. So many things should of course come to your head the moment you come across such a title, and then you can definitely construct your argument very authentically, strongly. Otherwise, you cannot, because your premise is loose. So fallacy of the single cause is a very huge fallacy in the area of all researchers, because students don't consider the premise seriously, right? And now, language of argumentation. What is this language of argumentation? Have I ever thought about it? I'm going to give you some tips with a presupposition that you all know English. And when you come for a PhD, there you cannot sit with your guide and ask him to do some English orientation for you, and you cannot ask your guide to correct your English. That is something which is very irritating for me as well. And in the meanwhile, I cannot do that as a guide. I expect my candidates, like all how the other guides expect, the researcher needs to have hold over his area of research. He needs to have a hold over the language that he has to adopt for construction of his thesis. Only then guidance can matter, because here you're getting into research and you have a guide, all right, but the guide is not your teacher. Margadashaka, he can only give you guidance remotely. The rest is up to you. A teacher at school stages and college stages can hold you by the hand and lead you to your destination. That is their responsibility. But guide's responsibility is not that. So when I ask you to do some reading, you need to simply come back to me after maybe a span of about 15 days or so, after having done your reading work. And you should always have this habit of reporting to your guide what you have read in a researcher's language. So I happened to read Edward Said yesterday, sir. Oh, great. What did you find in Edward Said? I think his theory of orientation is very needed for my work here, because I'm dealing with the natives with reference to Fanon's works. Oh, wonderful. So you want to consider both Fanon and Said? Yeah, because I am interested in the word Fanon uses in his title, wretched. So what does he mean by wretched, and what does Said mean by native here? So there's some kind of a connection that I want to bring about. So if you talk like this, your guide will definitely become very impressed, because you've done your homework. And your argumentation is actually happening here. You said something about Edward Said, and what did you say? You said Said is interesting for your thesis. Why was Said found to be interesting in your thesis? You gave an explanation. You provided ample evidence to your guide for considering Said to be important in your thesis. So these things are elementary. And now, what is the language? Language of argumentative language. You look for material on internet. You'll find n number of articles, n number of serious researchers done on argumentation or language of argumentation. And here I'll just introduce you to certain basics of theory of argumentation. Use the language lucidly, Lucidly, lucid, meaning no question of exuberance in your language. You cannot be very wordy in your thesis. Nobody appreciates you if you use your language strongly. For example, Amitav Ghosh constructs the image of India with unprecedented dexterity. Okay. Is this what you want to say about Amitav Ghosh? Yes, sir. I've written it. And your guide will simply remove Amitav Ghosh, and instead he will replace his name with Khushwant Singh. And he will ask you to read that sentence again. Khushwant Singh constructs the image of India with unprecedented dexterity. Is it wrong? Not really, because both in fact have written about India. So what is wrong in what you are trying to say? Your guide is trying to say that the word dexterity is a general adjective which is used only to exaggeratedly appreciate somebody, and it is not a research adjective. So as a researcher, if you want to appreciate somebody, your words of appreciation have got to be research oriented, technical. Why you find Amitav Ghosh to be extremely good writer? Use technical words, proper words. Supposing you want to talk about Shah Rukh Khan's acting skills. He's a good actor. He's an awesome actor. These are the words normally the college students use to describe Shah Rukh Khan's acting. But you are working on Shah Rukh Khan as a researcher. So you need to know what kind of words that are normally used in the area of theatrics. How can I describe somebody's acting? You need to know. So your language has got to be lucid and unambiguous. If you have done some writing in your college for circulars and letters and all, you will come across what ambiguity means, right? There should be no way and scope for doubts by the reader because he didn't understand something there. I repeat, your thesis has got to be completely self-explanatory. Your thesis can be self-explanatory only when your argumentation is unambiguous. Ambiguity in any way cannot be allowed inside your thesis. And try to write your thesis in third person. Third person. Because don't be very subjective. Don't be very subjective. Of course, there are many researchers today who, in fact, allow their candidates to use first-person narratives as well. But traditionally speaking, first-person narrative is normally avoided. So this is only a tip that I'm giving you. But in case you are permitted by your guide, and if you find first-person narrative to be pretty okay, then you can go ahead and do your write-up. But traditionally speaking, first-person narrative is avoided. Next is you need to understand the different kinds of vocabulary, meaning what is evaluative vocabulary? Evaluative vocabulary, meaning when I use some adjectives in my criticism, what are the words that normally work in my favor if I want to do proper evaluation of a particular writer? Evaluative vocabulary. This is something which you have to look for either on internet or try to have a discussion with your guide and check out. Next is proper linkers. Linkers. Your argument happens with the use of something called linkers. The connecting words. Connecting words. I'll give you an example. The movie is okay, but the director's efforts are great. So you are trying to add some stuff here. You are not ruling out the movie to be unworthy of watching. You are actually adding one simple point to your statement about it by using a linker there. He's a very good student, but irregular. So I'm only giving you some loose examples of how you can use linkers. Nonetheless, besides, in addition, nevertheless. So there are many such linkers you have to use in your argumentation, and look for all such things in your consultation with your guides and in your browsing on internet. There are many sources that you can access to get information. So that's it for today from my side. Hope I made some sense to you all. So thank you.
Anybody would like to raise a question? Please raise your hands.
Dr. Swami, I had a peculiar situation while finishing my thesis.
Yes, sir.
I found that Bendre has taken a metaphor directly from Khalil Gibran.
Okay.
By the way, my thesis is on a comparative study of Khalil Gibran and Bendre. And in one of the Kannada books, that is Professor Sumitendra Nadik, and he was also my good friend and what to say, a senior guide like.
Okay.
And we had nice chat. And all the while we used to discuss all these things. Since I knew him very closely, he had made a statement in his book Bhuvanatna Bhatya. You should have gone through that. It is not Bhuvanatna Bhatya. He has done a comparative study of Adigar, Bendre, and one more part, Narasimha.
Okay.
This is PhD thesis. In his thesis, he had mentioned that that particular line is taken from a Sanskrit play. Bhasana ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ನಾಟಕದಿಂದ ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವಿಮಾರಕ. But I asked my Sanskrit teachers, colleagues in the college, in Vijaya College, found that no, there's no such reference is found in the play. Then I called Sumitendra Nadik, sir, please, you have quoted this in your book. Now, please tell me where, how we can find in which. Maybe you have misquoted the play. Then he told me, no, I borrowed it from Kaikini's book.
Okay.
Kampinakare. Kampinakare. I went to Kampinakare, and there I found it's misquoted again. Yes, it is mentioned, but finally I found it's not in the play. So how do I bring this in my thesis?
ಕಷ್ಟ ಇನ್ಆಥೆಂಟಿಕ್ ಅನ್ಸಿದ್ರೆ ಅನುಮಾನ ಇದ್ರೆ ಬೇಡ,
ತರಲೇಬಾರ್ದ?
ಬೇಡ ಯಾಕೆ ಬೇಕು? Because you have to work on several other aspects here. One is the mentality of your evaluator. Because some evaluators will be pretty democratic and they might consider certain errors to be quite common and they may forgive you. But some people would be very obsessed with rules and regulations, and if they find some reference which appears to be quite loose, they might quickly ask you to either reconsider rewriting the entire thesis, or they might send the thesis back for some corrections, and that will lead to almost a repetition of the entire daunting process that you went through. And in the meanwhile, when you're not sure, it's almost like medication, Vaccine for COVID-19 will take its own time only because they are working on experiments, and they cannot simply ask people to take some medicines randomly, because you are not sure of the cure. Same way with academic investigation. When we are not sure about some reference, let's not use them.
What I did, I'll tell you. I mentioned it, saying that the source is, but I found the source. Actually, the source is in Khalil Gibran's work, The Broken Wings. Bendre has taken the metaphor from Khalil Gibran, not from the Sanskrit play. That's what I wanted to prove. And I said, this is the fact.
When we are doing this reference work, there's one more fallacy people will fall for. It's called cherry picking.
Cherry picking.
Yeah. Meaning they'll not look for the substantial argument. Instead, they'll only select some sentences for their convenience and quote those sentences as references. Supposing you are talking about Nietzsche. He had said God is dead. And you cannot construct some argument calling God a dead material, or you cannot consider working on God as a living being, because Nietzsche has made a statement that God is dead. Because unless somebody lived, he could not have died. And you cannot consider this to be a thesis reference material, because Nietzsche has said God is dead in a very different circumstance, and unless you have a clear-cut understanding of in what circumstances he mentioned the death of God, you cannot quote him. It's called cherry picking. Other dangerous fallacy.
Okay. Now, Mr. Vasant Bhatt has raised his hand.
Yeah. It's very interesting and a really challenging question that Professor Raghu has raised. My question is to Professor Swami. Now, actually, I go through a reference material of some famous author during my study. Okay, he quotes something in his book. I want to take that reference into my study. Should I mention the author I am reading or the reference which he has done?
Supposing you are reading a book in which the writer has quoted some other writer.
Yeah, for example, if I am reading historical
I understand. Yeah.
Research work of Shamba Joshi. Shamba Joshi has mentioned some ancient philosophers or some ancient work.
So bring that
I cannot go to Vedas and I cannot derive it from Vedas.
That's what.
But I think that particular quotation or reference is supporting my argument. Sorry. So in that case, I know Shamba Joshi is a good scholar. I can take his material as a good reference. But should I quote Shamba or the original text during my
both? Shamba Joshi quotes so and so in this particular work. You just use that in the running text.
ಓಕೆ ಡನ್.
ಚಂಬಾ ಜೋಶಿ ಅವರು ಹೇಳುವಂತೆ.
ಅದೇ ಅದು ಇವರು ಬಹಳ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ರು. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ತರ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ಬರ್ತಾವೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ. ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಬೇಂದ್ರೆ ಓದುವಾಗ ವೇದದ ಏನೇನೋ ತರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರು. ವಿಶ್ವ ಸಾಮರಸ್ಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಬ್ರಹ್ಮಾಂಡ ಮೈತ್ರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ್ದೋ ಉಪನಿಷತ್ತಿನ ಒಂದು ವಾಕ್ಯವನ್ನು ತರ್ತಾರೆ. ಆವಾಗ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಆ ಉಪನಿಷತ್ತಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ನಾವು ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಬೇಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಈ ಮಾತನ್ನ ಉಪನಿಷತ್ತಿನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಹೇಳುವಂತೆ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಸೇರಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಸರಿ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಐ ಗಾಟ್ ದ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. And in one more objection. You ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಗೈಡ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಎ ಟೀಚರ್. ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ತಮಾಷೆಗೆ ನೀವು ಹಂಗ ಟೀಚರ್ ಅದಿದ್ರೆ ನಿನ್ನೆ ನಾನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ನಲ್ಲ ಮರ್ಡರ್, ಹಂಗಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ನಿಮ್ದು ಮರ್ಡರ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಆಮೇಲೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
Hello, sir. Swami, sir.
Yeah.
One question answer I got it just now. Vasan sir asked the question, same question I was also expecting. I got
wonderful.
the answer.
Wonderful.
Actually, I submitted my thesis waiting for the Viva. So I'm preparing myself for the Viva.
Wonderful.
So, and one more question I have in my mind, like just now you mentioned that 600 quotes you had to mention in your thesis. So 600 you're talking about quotes means what? Bibliography, quotes,
Citations.
But citation, yeah, but now citation in terms of footnotes is not applicable. We need to follow only the bibliography concept. So you mean to say 600 bibliography quotes we need to mention in one thesis? Like 3 in a page, 3 quotes you said.
I don't mean to say 600 titles in your bibliography.
No, in page 3, in a page 3 quotes as you said, right?
Yeah.
So 3 page in a 3 quotes in a page, it means it will be more. Like ours will be the data that based on data. So only literature review will get more, and little bit will get in introduction part, first chapter. Remaining hardly will
our
get
research differs from. Yeah. Most of your quotes will actually go inside that review of literature that you do, and otherwise the data will be your work.
Yeah, true.
So that need not have any quotes at all, because it's purely your work.
Yeah, correct. So
analysis part and your statistics and all those things don't need to have any quotes at all. It's your work. Your results, the results of your work.
Yeah, correct, sir. So only hardly literature part and the introduction chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಅಡಿಷನ್ ಇದೆ ನನ್ನ ಮಾತನಲ್ಲಿ.
Sure.
ನಾನು ತಮಾಷೆಗೆ ಅಂದಿದ್ದು, ನಮ್ಮಂತ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಸ್ ಈಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಗ್ಯಾಪ್ ಇದೆ. ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಥಿಂಕಿಂಗ್, ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕಲ್ ರೈಟಿಂಗ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕಲ್ ರೀಡಿಂಗ್ ಆ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಇಂದ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಗೆ. ಇದಾಗಬೇಕಾದ್ದು ಹೈಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ಇಂದ PUC ಬರೋ ತನಕ, ಡಿಗ್ರಿ ಮುಗಿಯೋ ತನಕ ಈ ಬೇಸ್ ಬಿದ್ದಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆವಾಗ ನಾವು ಇದಕ್ ಬಂದಾಗ ನೀವ್ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಅನ್ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಆಗ್ತಾನೆ ನಾವು ಈ ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್, ಹೊಸ ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂತ.
ಹೌದು.
ಆವಾಗ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಚಾಲೆಂಜಸ್ ಬರ್ತವೆ. ಆವಾಗ ಸಮಟೈಮ್ಸ್ ವಿ ಡಿಪೆಂಡ್ ಆನ್ ದ ಗೈಡ್, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಗೈಡ್ he is not a teacher of course, ಬಟ್ ಆ ರೀತಿಯ ಒಂದು ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಇದು ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ಗೊತ್ತಾದ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇದಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇರೆ ಏನು ಗೈಡ್ಗೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಕೊಡದಂಗೆ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಬಗೆಹರಿಸ್ಕೋಬಹುದು ನಾವು?
ಅಲ್ಲ, ಗೈಡಿಗೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಕೊಡೋದು ಅಂತ ಏನ್ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಗೈಡ್ ಕೆಲಸನೇ ನಿಮಗೆ ಹೆಲ್ಪ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತದ್ದು, ಮತ್ತೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಇದನ್ನ ಮಾರ್ಗದರ್ಶನ ಕೊಡುವಂತದ್ದಲ್ವಾ. ಸೊ ಯು ಡೋಂಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಫೀಲ್ ಹೆಸಿಟೆಂಟ್ ಟು ಕನ್ಸಲ್ಟ್ ಯುವರ್ ಗೈಡ್, ಬಟ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಮೀನ್ ವೈಲ್ it all depends on the kind of study circle you have. You can always consult many number of researchers around, right? Because research is purely a collaborative activity.
Okay.
It is not one individual's activity at all. That's why people write acknowledgements, no? In acknowledgements they mention so many people out of courtesy, and some acknowledgements they mean also. They may have definitely got help from many people. So nobody can do research only with the consultation with the guide.
ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಶುರುವಾಗಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಹೊಸ ಒಂದು ಪರಂಪರೆ ಶುರುವಾಗಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಈಗ ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಂತೆ. ನನಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ ಒಬ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಈಗ ಒಬ್ಬ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ, ಒಬ್ಬ ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಇಬ್ರು ಸೇರಿ ಅವರು ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ನ ಐಡಿಯಾ, ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ ನ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಶನ್ ಇಬ್ರು ಸೇರಿ ಬರೀತಾರೆ, ಇಬ್ರಿಗೂ ಡಿಗ್ರಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಆತರ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಶುರು ಆಗಿದೆಯಾ?
ಹಲೋ ಸರ್,
ಆತರ ನಮ್ಮ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಗಳು ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇದೆಯಾ?
ನೋ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಬಹಳ ಲಿಮಿಟೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಅಲ್ವಾ ವಸಂತ್?
One of my cousin is doing his PhD from London University, one of the universities from London. ಅವನು ಆನೆ ಮೇಲೆ, ಅವನು ಎನ್ವಿರಾನ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್,
ಓಕೆ,
ಆನೆ ಮೇಲೆ PhD ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ. ಅವ್ನು ಫೀಲ್ಡ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ, ಬಂಡೀಪುರ, ಇದು ಆನೆ ಕ್ಯಾಂಪ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಬಟ್ ಹಿ ಇಸ್ ಟೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಹೆಲ್ಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಮ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್, language expert, and both of them they are getting degree awarded from the same university.
Okay.
ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಇವನು ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಇವೊಂದು ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ ಇದು ಕೊಲಾಬರೇಷನ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಷನ್ ಅವ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ.
ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯ್ತು. ಇಷ್ಟೆಲ್ಲ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು 20 ವರ್ಷ ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಎಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಸಿನಾರಿಯೋನೇ ತುಂಬಾನೇ ಪ್ಯಾಥೆಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ನೋಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ.
ಹೌದು.
ಸೊ ಆ ತರದ್ದು ಮಟ್ಟದ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ವಿ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ ಶೋರ್ ಹೌ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್. ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ಗುಡ್ ಥಿಂಗ್, ಕೊಲಾಬರೇಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಇಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ PhD ಕೊಡುವಂತದ್ದು ವಂಡರ್ಫುಲ್. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಆತ ಎನ್ವೈರನ್ಮೆಂಟಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ಅವನು ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ ಆಗಿ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಡೇಟಾ ಕೊಡ್ತಾನೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ಇವನು ಆರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಸೊ ಬೋತ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಡ್ ಈಕ್ವಲಿ ಹಾರ್ಡ್ and that is called serious research, but I'm not sure how Indians will take it. ಎಲ್ಲ ರೆಪ್ಲಿಕೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದೀವಿ, ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದೇನೋ.
Sir, Dr. Sanjeev sir is on the line. He raised a hands to ask question.
Hello sir, namaste sir.
Yes sir.
Swami sir. Hello Swami sir, namaste. ಸರ್ ಬಹಳ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿತ್ತು ಸರ್. ನನಗೆ ಒಂದನೇ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ವಸಂತ್ ಭಟ್ರು ಸರ್ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಎರಡನೇದು, ಇವಾಗ ನಾವು ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಅಂತ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನಾವು ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕವಾಗಿ ನಂಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ? ಅದನ್ನ ಮಾಹಿತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ನಿಂದ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳಲಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರು. ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಮಾಹಿತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಒಪ್ಪೋದಾ?
ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಯಾವ ಸೈಟ್ ಇಂದ ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಅದು ಏನು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು. ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಮಾಹಿತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಒಪ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ?
ನೀವು ಮತ್ತೆ ರಿಸರ್ಚರ್ಸ್ ಗೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ರೀಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ.
ರೈಟ್ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್.
ಹಲೋ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ನಿಂದ ಬ್ಲೈಂಡ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಇನ್ಆಥೆಂಟಿಕ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಹೌದು, ರೈಟ್ ಸರ್, 100%.
ನಾವು ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಒಪ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನೀವು
ಸರಿ ರೈಟ್ ಸರ್.
ಗೈಡ್ಗಳಾಗಿ we have to investigate into their investigation.
ರೈಟ್ ಸರ್ 100% ರೈಟ್ ಸರ್. ಓಕೆ, ಎರಡನೇದು ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್. ವಸಂತ್ ಭಟ್ ಸರ್ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಇದೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಓಕೆ,
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಸರ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಸಜೆಷನ್. ಈಗ MLA ಸ್ಟೈಲ್ ಶೀಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಅದು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಇಂದ ತಗೊಂಡಿರೋ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ. ಈಗ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು ತಗೋಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಆಥರ್ ಯಾರು ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ. ಆವಾಗ ಅನಾನಿಮಸ್ ಅಂತ ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಆ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಸೈಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಇದ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆಥರ್ ಅನಾನಿಮಸ್, ಬಟ್ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಈಸ್ ರೆಫರ್ಡ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದಿಸ್ ಸೈಟ್ ಅಂತ. ಆವಾಗ ಅದು ಅಥೆಂಟಿಕ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ.
ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಇಂದ ಮಾಹಿತಿಗಳನ್ನು ತಗೊಳ್ಳುವಂತ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಕೆಲವು ಫೋಟೋಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ತಗೊಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಆ ಫೋಟೋ ಯಾರು ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ನ ಸರಿಯಾದ ಯಾವ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ ಆದ್ರೆ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಇದನ್ನ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ತಗೊಳಕ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಇದು ಇದ್ದ ಹಂಗೆ ನಂಗೆ ನೆನಪು. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಹಂಗ ಹಾಕಿದೀನಿ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಓಕೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಲಿಂಕ್ ಅನ್ನ ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಅನ್ನ ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು.
ಲಿಂಕ್ ಅನ್ನು ಕೋಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಹೌದು
ಮೂರ್ತಿ ಅವರೇ, ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ನಿಂದ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳಲಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕುವ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ತಗೊಂಡ್ವಿ ಅಂತ ಸೈಟ್ ನ ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಷ್ಟೇ.
ಹೌದು.
ಅವರು ಸಂಜೀವ್ ಅವ್ರು ಕೇಳಿದ್ದು ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರೀ ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ನಿಂದ ತೆಗೆಯಲಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅವಾಗ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ವಾ ಅವರು?
ಇಲ್ಲ, ಹಾಕಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟ್ ಯಾವ್ದು ಅಂತ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ಯಾವ ಸೈಟ್ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಆದ್ರೆ ಸಬ್ ಸೈಟ್ ಸಮೇತ ಹಾಕ್ಬೇಕು.
ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ.
Sir, few participants from other state, they could not able to understand Kannada. Could you please explain in English what you are saying?
Yeah, sure. See, in case somebody is trying to extrapolate information from internet, you cannot vaguely mention that you have collected the information from internet. Instead, you have to specifically mention the site from which you took the material. Only then your referencing will become authentic. And the discussion is just about that.
Okay. Anybody would like to ask questions?
So hopefully we met your requirements, Raghu.
Yes, definitely, sir. Thank you so much. And Nantalil ಒಂದು ಓಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ವಸಂತ್, but again he wants to ask something. ವಸಂತ್ ನೀವು ಕೇಳ್ಬಿಡಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಾನು ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ.
Not question, sir. Actually, it was again an eye-opening session from Swami sir. Again, I was recollecting my experience during his classes, coursework classes. Actually, it was a wonderful class we had 4 years back with Swami sir, coursework classes. 6 months, it was a wonderful training. Today, actually, I am recalling those moments, and thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Swami sir,
yes, sir.
Since we have few minutes and there are no questions raised by participants,
sure.
Continuing our discussion that we had yesterday. Hopefully you remember what we discussed. You and Yoganand Rao, just before the participants entered, we were discussing about creativity and literary theories. It's a personal question, but still I want to ask it in public. You know, I'm a creative writer as well as I'm a teacher. I teach English literature as well. I'll be reading literary theories. Sometimes what I feel is my creativity or creative writing will take a backseat when I read lot of literary theories. When you take example of Shivram Karkar or someone else who is a Painchal, they did not write anything more about their what to say. They didn't write about literary theories. They are not considered as critics, but they are creative writers. So how do we balance these two?
Creative writing ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ, meaning we cannot understand creative writing as emerging only from imagination, because writings that emerge only from the brain are not in any way valid for our regular life, because the purpose of literature has got more to do with enhancing the quality of our life. So for a creative writer, he needs to reflect upon his own surroundings with a certain amount of criticism. So creativity will come into account only when he wants to articulate his observation of life with a critical perspective in a creative language. Like how we mentioned Gogol the other day, he uses certain tools in literature to mention what he has observed, because experiences will get articulated. And when you take, for example, black narratives, it could be Alice Walker or anybody. They all are creative works, all right, but in a language that is very, very vociferous and quite outrageous. And they are talking about how they were mistreated, but there will be a story inside that. So literatures today, in fact, will of course be a combination of creativity and criticism. Like the Nobel Prize winning book called Disgrace talks about history of Africa. It talks about the reversal of power in the case of whites there in Africa. In the meanwhile, it contains the story of a professor who happens to be involved in a rape. So you have a story there, but that story should allow the reader to understand many things around that story. So a creative writer has got to be a critic by himself. He cannot write only from his brain. He has to write from his experience. So when you combine your brain with your experiences, then criticism and creativity will go hand in hand.
Now, somewhere what I started feeling at one point of time is that these the proposers of literary theory are something like that. They stitch a quote and try to fit it into different people. Like Chomana Dudi ಬರಿಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್ ಓದಿರ್ಬೇಕು, ಆರ್ ಯು ನೀಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಸ್ಟಡಿಡ್ ದಲಿತ್ ಲಿಟರೇಚರ್. Isn't it?
Yeah.
That is something he has written on his own. Later on, we fit a theory into that.
I bring the reference of Samakshama, the work that I recently read, which contains Anantmurthy's works, and I refer to that interview that he conducted with Shivram Karanth. He asks Karanth about Chomanadudi and Sarasamana Samadhi, both. Because both were revolutionary works. And one thing that was quite interesting for Anantmurthy was how come a Brahmin could write about a Dalit in Chomanadudi, right? And Karanth gives a beautiful reply. He gives a beautiful reply, and I suggested one of my candidates to work on that. When you want to really empathize with caste issues, you don't really have to be a Dalit yourself. Even when you have certain kind of empathy for what those people go through, you can definitely articulate that as part of your write-up. So Karanth is not simply writing from his brain here. It is his observation, his experience of caste system, and the kind of objection that he took to for that caste system. So Chomanadudi is not just a creative work, it is purely a critical work. And Sarasamana Samadhi, so much empathy for the condition of women in India. You take any Anantmurthy's work, you will always have a widow in the protagonist's house, and it will be an old widow. And she would have become a widow in her childhood days. So this particular characterization will give us almost the history of patriarchy. This girl, this woman could have got married when she was simply a girl without any knowledge about what marriage meant, and she may have lost her husband at a very young stage, and she may have got her head bald at a very young stage, and she may have remained bald for almost ever. Simple characterization. He refers to an old woman who is bedridden, and that leads us to understanding the entire history of patriarchy. So there is creativity, but lovely criticism.
But what I feel is we can't do that as private institutions or small colleges. We cannot conduct such a big program. I want either you or Yoganand Rao sir to think seriously and do a workshop or a seminar for 3 or 4 days about literary theories and creativity. How they do they? There are a lot of questions. I think we should sit across, discuss, and plan something in this area.
Why not?
For example, I'll tell you. You quoted which is that widow story. Anantmurthy's work. When you pitch Ghata Shraddha against Paniyamma, that would be a very interesting study.
Yeah.
See, two creative minds, they are working on feminism in different angles.
Yeah.
So I want
bring in Kuvempu also, Nagamma and Nagase.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just, I wish that they were alive. Anantmurthy, Kuvempu, and LK. We have to bring the authors, we have to bring the theorists on the stage, and we have to make them face each other and put forth their argument. How this creativity came into mind without literary theory, or how I fit this literary theory into your creative work.
Surely we can do this.
That interaction, it should happen. That's what I feel.
See, Yoganand represents a private university. I represent a public university. So there can be a collaborative work, public and private university, and you can join hands.
Definitely.
So 3 educational institutions coming together to conduct a workshop on a large scale.
Exactly, that's the point.
We can do that. We can plan it out.
Yeah.
Can I raise my voice now?
Please go ahead.
Now coming back to Professor Raghu's question, what is the role of criticism or creativity? We have been witnessing the tug of war between these two categories from the time immemorial. For example, what I personally feel is creative writing is totally, it is created under a trance. You never think of a theory or any set of rules while you are writing a poetry or drama or novel. Just you go to a trance and it is created. But whereas theory. For example, if you look at Bhairappa's Truth and Beauty, PhD thesis, it is totally different. And when you read any of his novels, Parva, Dharmashri, it is entirely different. He makes use of that theory, and he creates something else out of that theory. The theory will be there, but it is restricted in his Truth and Beauty, that theory part of criticism. But as a novelist, he is not a critic. He is a creative writer. So he has to come out of the profound influence of the theory while you create something creative writing.
It's a traditional understanding that we all have about creativity. Creativity is not just about the abundance of words. Creativity is not just about exuberant words. And when it comes to being a creative writer, it's not that we need to possess huge amount of vocabulary. Those days are gone. It all depends on vichara today, right? Because imagination has stopped being a very important faculty for us. What matters to us is vichara, because whoever writes has to give us some food for thought, and that food for thought has got to relate to us in reality, meaning in our life. Otherwise it's not a literature at all. Lots of metaphors, lots of figures of speech. Those things, of course, might look good, but so what? What do I learn from it? Why should I read you? It's almost like your thesis. Yesterday, Yoganand was saying there will be a regular question: why should I read your thesis? Likewise, why should I read your work?
All right. So that opens another Pandora's box. We will continue in other field. Yes, madam. Please go ahead.
Hello, Swami sir. It's me, Purnima from SL's College.
Namaskara.
I just want you to briefly analyze Mukherjee Kanasugalu. As short as possible, if time doesn't permit.
ಆ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಒಂದ್ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ರಿಲಿಜನ್ ಇಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ, ಫೆಮಿನಿಸಂ ಎಲ್ಲವನ್ನೂ ಒಳಗೊಂಡಿರುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಅದ್ಭುತವಾದ ಪುಸ್ತಕ
ಅಲ್ವಾ?
ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಇಫ್ ಯು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಕಾರಂತ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಅ ಫೆಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್, ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಇಟ್, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಹಿ ಮೇಕ್ಸ್ ಅ ವಿಡೋ ಅಂಡ್ ಹಿ ಗಿವ್ಸ್ ಹರ್ ಅ ನೇಮ್ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ Mukherjee. Mookie,
but spectator, mute narrator,
and she appears to be such an orator about certain things to which she would not have got exposure at all, because she speaks about religion, and religion has always been occupied by men, and here is a woman who speaks about religion in such a deconstructive terms, and she actually becomes a kind of a torch bearer for all women to talk. So she is one woman who speaks up. And Kanasugalu, how can a woman have dreams? That's another revolutionary title that he has given. If you want to work on the title itself, there is so much, Marali Mannige, Alida Mele, Mai Managala Suliyalli, and here is another revolutionary title by Karanth, Mukherjee Kanasugalu. Like, how can a Mukherjee have Kanasugalu? So it's a wonderful treatise of many things at a time. I read this when I was traveling to Bangalore every day, and that too in a train. So wonderful experience it was for me.
Yes. Thank you.
Any more questions?
One more, sir. Seema Sinha has chat with us. Only site name or site address also to be mentioned when you were saying about internet?
Sir,
links.
when you said that we need to mention the source from the site if we'll take, we need to write the from where we take. So sites, the HTTP full site address we need to write, or from where we took the source. That is enough.
Address also, because the site from which you took the material, if it is open for editing by public also, there could be some inauthenticity there. So in case you took some material today and if you mention only the site there without the address of it, then the date could be missing.
Okay.
Meaning I took this particular site from this particular address on this particular date, then it will become authentic. Because tomorrow if somebody edits it and if your material appears to be slightly in contradiction with what you have quoted from, then there will be a problem. So you mention all possible sources, acknowledge all possible sources to be on the safer side.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir, ಅಲ್ಲಿ
Thanks a lot,
ಡೇಟ್
sir.
ಮಾತ್ರ
Your
ಅಲ್ಲ.
session is very wonderful.
No, thank
Hello?
you.
ಹಾ ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಡೇಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಕೂಡ ಬರಿಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ.
Sorry?
ಡೇಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಕೂಡ ಬರಿಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ನಂದೇ ಒಂದು ಸೈಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ನೀವು ಕಾಪಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಿ ಅಂತ ಆದ್ರೆ, ನೀವು ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ಕಾಪಿ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತೀರಿ, ಸಂಜೆ ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನು ಕರೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ.
Exactly.
ಸೊ ಏನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಡೇಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಬರಿಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ಹಾರ್ಡ್ ಕಾಪಿ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಔಟ್ ತೆಗೆದಿಟ್ಟಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಹೌದು.
Pallavi ma'am, I think it's time to wind up. Swami sir is looking at the watch, the clock.
Yes, sure.
And he'll be tired. I know he's very busy.
But we don't want to leave him now, sir.
Yeah.
We'll bring him to the village. Don't worry.
Actually, as sir said, he has been very busy throughout the day, so it's better we'll just leave him. Thank you so much, Dr. H.K. Swami sir, for the wonderful session as always, and introducing some amazing terms to all of us. The session was really beneficial for all the participants. Thank you so much once again. I thank our principal, Professor Raghuvi sir, for his guidance and support. A special thanks to Archana ma'am for the technical support.
Thank you.
I also thank all the faculty members and all the participants for joining us